Hello Brain Shakers, welcome to the Brain Shakers Academy. Your host here, Brave Alistair. In today's session, we're going to be looking at the physiology of lactation, how breast milk is produced from the breast. So I have drawn a diagram here that is going to help us to understand the physiology of lactation and some of the hormones and body structures that play a key role in the production of the breast milk itself. Now, if we look at these diagrams that I have drawn here, you'll understand that the brain has a role to play when it comes to breast milk production. So you have the hypothalamus here that plays key role. And then you have the pituitary gland here. This is going to be the pituitary gland. This is your uterus here. Then these are going to be the important cells themselves that will be stimulated to produce the milk, will come to them. And then you have the breast on this end. So this is the breast of the breastfeeding mother. So the production of breast milk is facilitated by two important hormones. And those two important hormones will be number one, prolactin. And number two, we have the oxytocin hormone. Now, the prolactin hormone is a hormone that is coming from the anterior pituitary gland. So it has to be stimulated. The pituitary gland has to be stimulated by the hypothalamus to produce the prolactin hormone, which will then come down to the breast of the mother and stimulate the cells that produce the milk. Now, what are the cells that produce this same breast milk? So if you look at this diagram that I have drawn here, you'll understand that there's more or less like a sac. So we've done a cut here in the breast to give us this diagram that we have here. And this is an alveoli or acini type of cell. Now I have done a video on the glandular epithelium, and you can find that on my YouTube channel, which is the Brain Shakers Academy, that explains the lining of these glands, the lining of these ducts, and the epithelial tissues as well. So this here is an example of an acini cell. Now the acini cell here is what is producing the breast milk itself. Then around the acini cells, you have another special type of epithelial cells, which we call the myoepithelial cells. So these cells here are going to be called myoepithelial cells. So myo, it means that they contain some muscle in them, meaning that their function then will be to contract and then get rid of the milk. So the acini cells will be stimulated by the hormones that will be produced, which is the prolactin hormone, to produce that milk. And then the myoepithelial cells will then later be acted on by another hormone as well to then contract and allow that milk that has collected in the alveoli to then flow and be released towards the nipple for the baby to actually feed on. Now let's look at that pathway that these hormones are going to take for them to facilitate the release of that breast milk. So when there is suckling that is happening here, if you have a baby here that is sucking from the mother's breast, what is going to happen is that there will be a signal that is then going to be sent from the breast all the way to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is going to be stimulated to produce a hormone that would then stimulate this pituitary gland to say there is need for prolactin and there is need for oxytocin as well to be produced. So once the signal then has gone to the hypothalamus is going to cause this gland, which is the pituitary gland, that is the whole gland here, will be stimulated to produce two important hormones, meaning that the anterior aspect here is going to produce prolactin, and then the posterior aspect is going to release oxytocin. Now I'm saying release because it does not produce the oxytocin. The oxytocin is a hormone, it's a neuropeptide hormone that is produced in the hypothalamus by a special type of cells that you would call the magnocellular neurosecretory cells. Okay, and these ones you find them around the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei. Okay, so that is where the oxytocin is being produced, because it is a neuropeptide, and then it travels by way of neural pathways to be stored in the posterior aspect of the pituitary gland. And that is why the posterior aspect of the pituitary gland is classified or named as the neurohypophysis. The front one is classified as the adenohypophysis. The posterior is classified as the neurohypophysis. Now, once the oxytocin then has been released by the posterior aspect, or by the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, it will have to affect two areas. That will be the uterus and the cells around the acini cell which has produced the milk. We have the prolactin coming from the anterior aspect of the pituitary gland there, that will then come and affect these acini cells. So it will come into the acini. Remember, we said that that is the acini cell. So the acini cell is the one that is producing the milk, and it will be affected by this hormone, which is the prolactin hormone, coming all the way from the anterior pituitary gland and then stimulated to produce the milk. So you have a number of acini cells in here that will be forced to produce their milk, and when they produce their milk, the milk will then accumulate within their alveoli here. And then the posterior aspect now produces the oxytocin hormone, and the role of the oxytocin hormone is to cause contraction. Now, one of the roles of the oxytocin is that it will come straight to these cells that surround the milk producing cells, which are called the myoepithelial cells, and force the myoepithelial cells to start contracting. The contraction of these myoepithelial cells now is what is going to cause the movement of that milk towards the nipple. So meaning that the milk is going to move from here and come to the nipple, and then you have milk coming out from the breast. So that is how milk is obviously going to be produced from the breast. Now, the oxytocin is not just stimulating the myoepithelial cells. The oxytocin hormone is also going to stimulate the uterus. So there is an element of oxytocin here that is going to be going to the uterus and forcing the muscle layer within the uterus there to actually contract. And when the muscles begin to contract, and this is why now we are saying that the act of breastfeeding, and when you put a baby to the breast in the first hour or initiate lactation in the first hour of birth, it will help in the prevention of conditions such as postpartum hemorrhage, and also enables the baby to bond well with the mother. Now, the reduction in postpartum hemorrhage cases is going to be facilitated by the effect of the oxytocin on the uterus, forcing it to contract. And forcing the uterus to contract will mean that the uterus is going to go back into its area of position or its area of location by involuting or reducing in shape and size, and also making sure that at the site where the placenta was attached, there is ligative action of those muscles to actually close and not to allow the bleeding to continue from the placental side. So this is the physiology of lactation. This is how milk is going to be produced. So basically, two main important hormones that are going to be produced. That is the prolactin hormone coming from the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, then stimulating the acini cells to produce their milk, which will then collect into the alveoli. And then you have from the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland a hormone called oxytocin, which is a neuropeptide that is produced right in the hypothalamus there. Then will be the cells around the acini cells, then will contract and release that milk. So that is the physiology of lactation, and that is how milk then will be produced. But I must also be quick to make mention that the control of milk production is going to happen in two phases. That is, you have an area that is controlled by the prolactin hormone, that is the production element, and then you will regulate the amounts of milk that will then come out because of the presence of an element that we call the FIL, which is the FIL, just to be the feedback inhibitor of lactation. As the baby does breastfeed, then more of that FIL is being released, and then the cells will continue continue to be stimulated to produce more milk. If the baby does not feed from that other particular breast, or is feeding from one breast, the breast that the baby is not adequately using, then we'll have an accumulation of that inhibitor, and then the body is going to be stimulated not to produce more milk, because that is a protective mechanism so that the breast does not have plenty of milk, and then you end up with an engorged breast and then mastitis and all those other complications that come with breastfeeding. So that is the physiology of lactation. Now, if you found this particular video helpful in understanding some of the facts about the physiology of lactation, or what happens for milk to be released from the breast, drop me those comments in the comments section. I would like to hear what you have to say. Thank you so much for watching, and from me, I will see you in the next one.